All right. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. It's a Tuesday night. I know everyone has a lot to do on a weeknight, so we won't drag this on too long, but I am very happy and just so pleased to have this conversation. My name is McElvey Neal. I'm the executive editor of the Haitian Times, and I just want to thank you all for joining us this evening. I want to give a special thank you to Dr. Carole Berotte Joseph, our very first Haitian American college president in the United States. It's an honor to just be in her company, and I'm really looking forward to some of the wisdom that she'll share tonight. For those who aren't too familiar with me, as I said, I'm the editor here at the Haitian Times. I'm also a communications consultant in my other life and have been for a decade or so, supporting executives, workforce, change management communications, including DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion communications. So for me, this hits in different ways, in different aspects as a Haitian American woman, a Black woman, an immigrant, and the communications work that I do. Before I introduce Dr. Berotte Joseph, for anyone who's not familiar with why we felt it was necessary to come in today and have this conversation, I just want to bring you all up to speed really quickly. Okay, as most of you know, Dr. Claudine Gay, the very first Black and second woman president at Harvard University, resigned from that post last week, Tuesday, exactly 1 week ago. And she stepped down after a very intense month of criticism, attacks, harassment that took place both online and offline. And the attack stemmed from for two reasons. One was the way that some felt she addressed questions poorly during the Congressional Education and Workforce Committee hearing that took place in early December, where she had to handle questions about anti-Semitism on Harvard's campus. Specifically, when people asked, I'm sorry, give me 1 second, I have a child here. My apologies, that was my 6-year-old, forgive me. But specifically when Dr. Gay was asked about whether the genocide of Jews would be a violation of Harvard's policies on harassment, she responded that it depended on the context. And so that caused, just a huge reaction from different people. And that also led to reason two that she faced a lot of criticism and backlash, which was that the hearing itself and the role that she's in is one she was not qualified to handle. And that also spawned all kinds of examples of her being underqualified, specifically these allegations of plagiarisms that surfaced. And so over the past 2 months, we saw that Harvard stood by her and then they did it. And ultimately that led to what we saw last week. In between that month, though, we heard from a lot of academics, Black, Haitian, who were just so furious about the fact that her qualifications could be called into question. A lot of us saw it as just not only ignorant, but, racist and just utterly ridiculous. And so Dr. Carole Berotte Joseph, who has been in the role that Dr. Gay was in for that brief period, is here to share with us what her experience has been in academia and kind of give us a sense of where a lot of that bullying stems from, how she handled it herself. And for us who are emerging leaders or people in the community, in academia or in other fields who may be, facing similar situations, how or what can we do really? So I'd love to hear her perspective on that. We'll hear from her in a few minutes. For those who have not met Dr. Carole Berotte Joseph, I saved this for last because she is just such a phenomenal woman in my mind. But she is, as I mentioned, the first Haitian-born person to be president of a college in the United States. And she has the distinction of being of serving as president, not once, but twice at two different institutions in the US. Mass Bay Community College in Massachusetts and Bronx Community College in New York, right here at the City University of New York. Over her 45 years in education, she's done it all, it seems, served in roles as a faculty member and administration before rising to the level of the presidency. And so I'd like to start there first with Dr. Berotte as my first question. You know, for people who saw this unfold with Dr. Gay and the claims of her being, you know, underqualified or incompetent and all of these other things they said to her, can you give us an idea of actually what it takes to become the president of a university or college and what that recruitment, hiring, you know, decision and process is like before someone could even be in that role?
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael V. A pleasure to be here with all of you to reflect on these events and try to share our perspectives. The job of president of a college is very complex, very complicated, and it isn't something that you apply for and you get right away or immediately. Most presidents have applied many times for this position. And so you do not get it automatically like you've gotten other positions if you were a teacher or an administrator, a director, et cetera. So it is a very long process. Most campuses take at least a year to recruit a president. And the recruitment usually goes through professional search firms. So these people, you know, scout out candidates, encourage people to apply, and they always begin with a rather large pool of candidates and then wind it down. Every campus establishes a presidential search committee, if you will, consisting of the stakeholders and constituents from throughout the campus and the community. So depending on the college, depending on what their focus is, you have, you know, different makeups of these committees. So with this intense process of, you know, looking at people, looking at applicants, um, you know, beginning the initial screenings that by the committee and then scheduling interviews. The interviews themselves are very intense. You know, the candidate would meet with a committee first, and then you meet with a host of other groups and committees, both on campus and in the community, with alumni, with unions. So it is not, you know, a flippant process. It's a process that takes time. And so having gone through a process and then for a committee to vet you, to say they want you, to check references and all of that. And the reference checks are very, very thorough. It's not just calling people. There are all kinds of deep investigations that go into this because nobody wants to hire anybody who's going to be a problematic kind of figure. So the process itself is very intense. So it's rare that you would find after somebody's been hired and celebrated and welcomed that you would put into question, you know, their credentials. So that came up really as part of the noise, if you will, that occurs when other issues, you know, creep up on campuses. Because once, you know, you're hired, the committee's made a recommendation, the board or the foundation, whatever is, you know, making the final decision, makes that decision. It is not an easily reversed decision. So you'd have to have done something really outrageous, you know, to be asked to leave right away. Um, you know, most people, even when they're bad, some, you know, some boards and some search committees have made bad decisions. Many
Right.
of us have been on campuses where we've seen leadership that really shouldn't be there, but somehow they made it to the end and they do stay. So people are given a chance to prove themselves and people work with them, et cetera. So in this particular case, it was totally odd.
Mhm.
that at Harvard, which is, a world-renowned institution, that their process would have been flawed. So
Right,
I don't
right.
think that's an issue that, we need to worry about or discuss, because she would not have been selected if she was not qualified.
Right. So we can get into that, specifically the plagiarism claims just a little bit in a little while, but I would like to understand ultimately, right? Or for our attendees to understand who are not in the in academia, what the role is ultimately of a college president as the top administrator. I mean, it'll vary, of course, but from
Yeah.
your experience, what is that? Both the vision and the day-to-day tasks.
Yeah, the role is definitely one of a visionary,
Mhm,
someone who will motivate people to do things depending on the campus. Each campus is different, each campus has its own culture. And so presidents, when they're hired, are really given marching orders by their hiring bodies in terms of what is expected and what they would like to see done.
mhm,
So a president knows more or less what areas, you might need to focus on. As you prepare and study for interviews, you get to know the campus, get to know the good, the bad, and whatever needs attention.
mhm,
So definitely you're aware of those things. But in terms of the day-to-day management, every president has a cabinet, a group of people that they work with, who are their leaders, their vice presidents, their deans, etc. Because no president can do the job alone. You are providing a vision, you're providing leadership, and you are also a big role in fundraising.
mhm,
So I myself, and then presidents come from different, walks of life. Most presidents tend to come from academia. They were faculty before, they were deans, they were vice presidents. Some
mhm,
come from the student development side of the house, counselors or vice presidents of student affairs. Some from business and industry, depending on what the college is looking for. And some have doctorates and have done research, some may not. So depending on the need of the campus, that's the kind of profile that they would look for. But the standard is mostly that presidents come from academics,
mhm.
that they themselves have had a role and understand academia. Because
Right.
we all know the central piece, the centerpiece of the college is the faculty, but
Mhm,
it can't be just the faculty. I used to tell my faculties that we don't exist if we don't have students.
right.
So while we like to think faculty, are the most important, for me, students are the most important. And I was very proud and very happy to be known as a student-centered president.
That's excellent. You did very well by all accounts. But before I get into, the issues that a president might face, can you tell us how you personally rose into that role and how you actually begin to consider that level of leadership in your experience?
Yeah. Well, I was a faculty member. I was a teacher. Essentially, I am a teacher at heart. And my cabinet, my deans and vice presidents always used to tell me they saw the teacher in me, because I used every opportunity that we had for us to continuously learn as a community. And so even though I was in charge, I was the head, we used to read together, we'd have discussions together, we'd have professional development. And everyone I hired, I always asked them where they wanted to be in 5 years.
Mm,
So the role of mentoring for me was very important. I did not have the kind of mentors that I should have had or could have had.
mhm,
And I remember when I started at the City College School of Education, in 1975, as a full-time faculty member, there were a handful of people of color. And we
mhm.
had started bilingual programs, so we had some Latinos, but people of color, Black people, we were only, three or four. So you're
Wow.
in a room in a school that has 50 or 60 faculty members. That's what it was like back then.
Mhm,
But I love teaching, so I stayed in teaching for quite a long time, and then did do some administration because I was moved by some of the administrators that I saw near me who were really not leading. And so that kind of encouraged me to do that. I applied, in fact, for a Kellogg Fellowship on Community College Leadership, and am a Kellogg Fellow and was exposed to community colleges throughout the country. And that's
Mhm.
how I became enamored of community colleges. But my first 20 years were mostly in four-year schools and senior schools. So
Okay.
I taught at the bachelor's level, the master's level, and had several doctoral students
Mhm.
that I mentored through their own dissertations.
Right. And of
So,
course, it gives you
so that
background.
experience, having been a faculty, having been an administrator, I became an assistant dean, then a dean, then a vice president.
Mhm.
And I did that at several different schools, both within CUNY and SUNY.
Mhm.
And so my goal was keep getting experience, because if you want to be a leader and you want to be a president, you need to have a lot of experience.
Right.
And to my surprise, when I finally started applying for positions and
Mhm.
attended some of these, preparatory programs, people would share, that they applied for 10 presidencies and didn't get it until after the 10th. This Latino man told us he applied 27 times before he got
Wow.
his first presidency. So these are not positions that you get by applying once or twice.
Mhm.
They're very, very detailed. There's a question of fit that people talk
Mhm.
about, that
Mhm.
your experience, your personality, and things like that, your passions
Mhm.
fit, with the university. And
Mhm.
so they are not easy to come by. And that is why, even though most of my career had been in New York, I was encouraged by headhunters to look elsewhere, be flexible, be willing to move. And so my
Okay.
first presidency ended up being in Massachusetts.
But
Uh,
what made you say, I'm curious to know, I'm ready, like I'm ready now to be president of a university? Was there
well,
that, go ahead. Hmm.
when you're a vice president, very often you're called upon to be president, many
Hmm.
times if the president is away from the campus. And so I enjoyed, the leadership. I enjoyed taking charge. We got things done. So I felt I can handle, a position of a presidency.
Hmm.
I had the vision and I had enough experience under my belt. So I
Okay.
felt very comfortable that I knew a lot of the different levels of academia.
Hmm.
And so when I decided, to apply, I got Mass Bay Community College after 3 tries. That was my third try. So I
Wow.
went for, and in both interviews, when I first applied, I was a finalist. And it's very hard to be a finalist when you first start interviewing. So
Wow.
obviously, I felt I was ready.
Hmm.
And Mass Bay was the third campus I interviewed at, and that worked out.
Okay. Now you mentioned earlier that when you get to campus, a lot of times the president has to deal with a lot of noise. What was some of the noise that you dealt with in your day, both,
Yeah.
academically because of who you are, how you look? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, when I first got there, I was welcomed, just like Claudine Gay was welcomed. Everybody was happy, you're there. And on my campus, they actually were very happy that a Haitian was coming. And they actually planned a Haitian art exhibit
Mhm.
around the time of my inauguration. We had a whole week of celebrations. Many important people in the community, came and participated in guest lectures
Mhm.
of different types, Obia Faton and Edwidge Zantika, from the people that we know here in the States, came and participated and celebrated with me. And then after that, the real work starts after the celebration. So of
Mhm.
course, as a new person, anybody who studied leadership knows you don't just come in and start doing. So I had meetings with the president. I had breakfast with the president, lunch with the presidents. People, like to eat. So I
Mhm.
figured we just worked with HR and got small groups together, and we would have conversations, just conversations with the president. So,
Mhm.
so the first year went fairly well, and people who were not available in the morning. We had breakfast, we had lunch, and we had dinners.
Mhm.
So there was always an opportunity for staff, and I mingled staff, students, and faculty and administrators. So each group had a cross section of the campus to just come and talk to me, tell me what's on their mind, what they would like to see at the campus. And so
Mhm.
those were very successful. It was really the second year when now my board wanted to know where I was going. We didn't have a foundation at this campus, so I
Mhm.
established the first foundation. Tabu Combo played at our, final event where it was a fundraiser for the college to launch scholarships. And
Mhm.
so it was a big celebration and a lot of fun. Paul Farmer was one of the speakers, et cetera. So a lot of people who were very supportive participated.
Okay.
And I guess because I was the first, the board really wanted for this to be celebratory and to have representations of the
Mm,
community come to the campus.
okay.
So the second year, I started looking at where we were, what we were doing. We had issues. We had some programs that needed to be reviewed academically. We
Mhm.
had our own accreditation that was coming up. So we had work to do. And
Mhm.
accreditation on college campuses occurs every 5 years because every 10 years is a big visit. And so we planned for that. And as we're doing that, and I'm looking at the quality of people that I have, there was a pattern there at that college for people to become deans and to be in charge of departments when they had never taught. For
Mm.
me, that was a big red flag. How are
Mm.
you going to supervise faculty and work with them when you yourself never taught? And
Right.
so I put that question on the table very openly, and I said, people who are in these positions are welcome to apply, but I am going to advertise all of the dean positions.
Mm.
And so once I said that, that unleashed a bunch of attacks.
Like
The
what?
board was with me. They were
Mhm.
100%. They knew that we needed change at this college, but people started getting very antsy. Nobody wanted change, and the union started attacking me.
Mm.
Even though I kept my door open and I kept, conversations going. And it was at that point that, they would say things like, go back to Haiti and, you have no business doing this here. These people have been in their jobs like forever. And like, who are
Right.
you to come in and rock the boat, etc.
Who would say these things? And was it to your face or behind your back? How did
Well,
you find
I
out?
had all of it. I had some to my face at meetings. I
Mm.
had some in writing. I mean, if any of you Google me, you will see a lot of interesting headlines in the Boston Globe.
Mhm.
Those of you who were in Boston at the time knew that I was a recognizable face in Boston. No matter where I went, people would recognize me. I'd have people in the community say to me, hey, you must be doing something right. Keep doing what you're doing. And so people, because I was in the press a lot.
Mhm.
So, and because these criticisms were not just, on the campus, they spilled outside the campus.
Of
So when
course.
that occurs, boards and the people who are responsible at the college get worried. They
Mhm.
don't want negativity, to be surrounding the college and for people to be calling and asking for questions. And all kinds of malice,
Mhm.
occurs.
Mhm.
So anything I would do on the campus would be in the Globe like the next day. And we're wondering, where does the information go? How did it leak and all of that?
Right.
And and I always say my ancestors were with me because I always found out when
Mhm.
some of these things were being concocted. And we had some faculty members who had family or friends working for the Globe, and they would leak information.
Mm.
One day I had a decision, I made a personnel decision with one of my vice presidents. A half hour didn't go by when the Globe was calling me for comments.
Wow.
And so you have certain people on campus who sometimes, didn't want you, they don't like you, they don't like who you are, they don't like what you look like.
Mhm.
So the insults came from all over. And
Mhm.
there are days I'd come home and my husband, I'd tell him what the day was like, and he said, "Oh my God, you just came out of a lion's mouth."
Wow.
And that's how ferocious and mean sometimes it
Yeah.
could.
Yeah.
And a
Do
lot
you
of
think that
higher ed,
being, I'm sorry,
can be
do you
like
that
that.
being, I'm sorry to speak over you. I'm just wondering, because you said they were so happy you were Haitian American, and obviously there's a Haitian community in the Boston area. do you think that made you, that added an extra layer for you to become a target, not just being a Black woman, but an immigrant woman?
No, absolutely, because if it didn't really make a difference, then I shouldn't have gotten notes about going back to Haiti. I mean, there were notes published with an airplane and saying go back to Haiti. So, and of course, I'm of immigrant background. I was born in Haiti,
Mm-hmm.
unlike Claudine, who was born in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So, for her, to also receive that barrage of malice,
Right.
um, is really astonishing. So,
Mm-hmm.
so that was hard. But I think what helped me, um, in my tenure as president in that difficult situation was that
Mm-hmm.
I did have a board that was very supportive, that was behind me 100%, and that even hired a public relations firm to work with me to get the positive stories out about what was going on campus.
Mm.
I had a governor at the time, Governor Deval Patrick, who was very supportive. Politicians, in Massachusetts, who were also very supportive. We had two Haitian politicians of note, Marie
Mm-hmm.
Saint-Fleur, that I can name, and
Right.
um, and also, oops, I'm forgetting the name
Mm-hmm.
of the other person. But anyway, those two stood up. The Black Caucus held hearings because, it was a campus that had a lot of students coming from Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were a mixed campus. And I had fights about, for example, a bus that I provided from the train station to the Framingham campus because we had three campuses, three locations at this college. And people were against me because we were paying for a bus to take students from the subways in Boston and in certain stations to the Framingham campus. And the Framingham campus was the health focused campus. That's where we
Mm-hmm.
had our nursing programs. And anyone who knows the Haitian community knows
Right.
that a lot of our Haitian students want to become nurses.
Mm-hmm.
So this was a way to make sure that the students were able to get from one campus to another since they were not driving. They
Right.
couldn't afford cars. They weren't driving to school. So I got a lot of criticism for that. And, why am I doing this? And I'm doing it because I want, these students of color to get to Framingham. Obviously, yes.
Right.
But so I got flack for that, that kind of thing. So there are certain decisions that you make, even though they're within your power, they're
Mm-hmm.
within your budget. I'm very proud to have managed all of my budgets, really well. And so, the college was in good shape, was growing, was making changes. And so the board was happy.
Yeah.
And so the board was very supportive. Now, 6 years later, as I'm leaving to go to New York, the same people who criticized me, the
Mm-hmm.
same people who were picking up the phone and calling the Globe came to tell me, why am I deserting them? Why am I leaving? It's like, because things had changed for the better at the school.
Hmm.
At this point, they realized that the changes were needed. And
Yeah.
so
So you
things
won
had,
them
yes,
over
and things
time.
had subsided. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's great that you had that grace and, that time to make those changes. Do you think that considering the environment we're in today, that you would have been as successful or even given that chance to turn things around? Just thinking about how politicized
Yeah.
our society has become over the past, since you
Yeah,
were president
the
20 years.
society definitely is much more politicized, and especially
Mhm.
with the current events. I mean, for current events to spill onto campuses to the point it did, and for those three presidents to have been summoned, by that congressional committee, um,
Right.
was sickening. I listened to those hearings. Those
Mm-hmm.
hearings were like 5 hours of grueling and insulting, not really questioning to find out what was going on or to solve
Mm-hmm.
problems. And I think all three presidents held themselves, very well throughout
Mm-hmm.
and responded, pretty accurately to what they could do. But it seems like it was a setup.
Mm.
these Congress people really wanted these presidents out. And
Right.
we see that they succeeded, of course, in getting UPenn out, but we know that UPenn's situation was different from Harvard.
Mhm.
But they're still saying they want to go after MIT's president. So we'll see where that goes. But Dr. Gay was just, a vicious attack.
Mhm.
Because even at those hearings, we saw certain representatives who were just screaming and yelling. It
Right.
wasn't, a cordial questioning or investigating.
Mhm.
So, and then to
Oh,
get back to the campus,
right. But all that being said, I did hear from quite a number of people who said any question about genocide of anyone anywhere should have been, just a flat out, no, that's not acceptable, instead of the more loyally answers that the president's provided. So what are your thoughts on that? The
yeah,
critique that they over lawyered.
I think that, you know, we're at a crossroads right now in higher education in the US because universities are places where people are supposed to be able to express views. But
Right.
the problem you have with free speech is that you can't allow the views, to border into hate incidents.
Mm-hmm.
And when they border into hate incidents, there has to be a response that's pretty swift, where you say that this will not be tolerated. And and no matter how many times you say it, it's as though you haven't said it enough. It's almost like you have to be a broken record
Mm-hmm.
because many people will not hear it when you say it. Many people will not want to hear it when you say it.
Right.
And so when Dr. Gay, expressed grief and sadness that she said it, obviously people were not satisfied that she said it enough.
Mm-hmm.
And when she did share some of the actions that she did take, they were not satisfied, with those actions.
Mm-hmm.
So then when the rumbles, started about plagiarism, so
Right.
then the narrative was changing. It wasn't just about, the threats on campus and that people felt unsafe because you do have to ensure safety. And I think one of the toughest jobs is that presidents are not safety experts. They depend on their campus police
Right.
and, campus people to guide them through some of
Mm-hmm.
these incidents.
Mm-hmm.
And and sometimes the words aren't enough. You've got to use a multimedia approach
Mm-hmm.
and squelch, these kinds of protests, and also plan on doing things to get people together to talk. Because anybody could go to a protest and say something, nasty that will incite
Mm-hmm.
others. But I think, fortunately, we have not had any kind of, physical harm to
Right.
people on campuses. So thankfully, it has not gotten, to that point. But it's a fine line between the inciting, of violence and then the
Mm-hmm.
actual violence taking place.
Mm-hmm.
So those are judgment calls.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, it's hard to say anyone in a similar position, and to look back and say what could have been done differently,
yeah,
um, to speculate on all of that. But for us as a Haitian, as Haitians, as a community, we're watching this, and like you said, it seemed like a setup. What do you think the community itself might have or could have done at that point, or just for being able to respond maybe in the future when similar situations arise to someone in our community who's being targeted?
yeah. I think as a community, we lack that kind of responsiveness on everything. So, if we have a friend, a colleague who is attacked that way, even though it is a personnel decision and it is something that the campus has to handle, I
Mm-hmm.
think it would send a strong message to the campus and to that college that this person has backup. Not necessarily that we would, demand that she keep her job because you can't do that. the president serves at the pleasure of the board that appoints them. This
Right,
is a position where
right.
you have, it's not like a faculty position where you earn tenure and you're there forever.
Mm-hmm,
So if any board member doesn't like something you're doing and they raise it at a meeting and they get enough people to vote against you, you could be asked to step down.
mm-hmm,
It doesn't even have to be a very public thing like what happened with Claudine Gay.
mm-hmm.
Her, unfortunately, this happened very publicly with
Right,
the hearings and then on campus very publicly. Because again, with the plagiarism thing, if you did your dissertation, you've been a faculty member, you've published for so
right,
many years, if you had plagiarized before, it should have been identified.
right,
So even, if you say it was done in her dissertation, then the dissertation chair should be held accountable.
right,
How did you not discover that before? And then we've seen since this incident, a lot of definition of plagiarism then and plagiarism
mm-hmm,
now,
now,
and how things could be, um, thought to be plagiarism, but not really plagiarism. So as a researcher, I'm sure she knows,
mm-hmm.
how to write and how to publish. So I'm not
I
sure
mean,
that those were real, even though we've been shown some samples of things that look similar.
mm-hmm,
There is such a thing as paraphrasing, which is not plagiarism. And
mm-hmm,
so I think all that has to be delved into, and it shouldn't just be a Dr. Gay thing. Everybody
right,
else they're accusing of plagiarism, or the students of these professors who, whose doctoral dissertations they supervised, I think a look needs to be taken at all of them. You can't
right,
just, an accusation like that on one person. So I think that was part of the noises, if you will,
mm-hmm,
on campuses, that when something like that occurs, you see how the misinformation, blows up into fire.
right,
So that's the story that everybody's running with,
mm-hmm,
as if to show she's incompetent. And
right,
that is not the real story.
mm-hmm. I mean, to go back to what you said about the Haitian community not being responsive enough,
Yeah,
really to anything. Can you elaborate more on that? Because on the one hand, we're saying having a show of support wouldn't have necessarily meant that it would sway the board one way or the other, right? If it
right.
came down to an academic decision or how they make personnel decisions, but what impact could responsiveness on the part of Haitian community play going forward in these
Yeah,
types of
I think
scenarios?
I think that the responses would have to be swift.
Mm-hmm,
It would have to be immediate, and we don't yet in this community have a body, an entity that will respond to whatever the attack is, whether the attack is on a person, a president, on a
mm-hmm,
leader, or it's on the country. We have not set up that mechanism yet, and it's time that we do that as a community,
mm-hmm,
to get together and come to, um, an effort where there is a spokesperson, if you will. I mean,
mm-hmm.
anybody says anything about Jews, you have the American Jewish Committee responding. You
Right.
have the ADL responding.
Mm-hmm,
So we need groups like that would be able to respond. We have some experts in particular areas that could be called upon, like the Haitian Times has done that many times, reached out to people who know the fields to be able to make statements, but it isn't as powerful as an organized community group.
yeah.
So I think definitely that we need.
I think that's a great takeaway for anyone listening. How to go about setting that up is a whole other conversation. But I think
Absolutely.
it's certainly a great takeaway,
Yeah.
for this evening.
Yeah.
So going back to the plagiarism, right? Someone asked, how did that come up or why is it different? I mean, we all saw how after the hearing, as we said, people started questioning her competence and saying she's incompetent and she's nothing but a DEI hire, meaning affirmative action, if you will. She was hired because the board did not look at anyone who didn't fit the criteria that the school has in place for diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And so their thinking and critiques were that is that if there had been people in the pool of candidates who didn't fit the DI criteria, that Dr. Gay herself never would have made the finalist pool. And so that's where the question of race and racial equity comes in, and why this is different for those who are asking in the chat, what was different this time around. So do you want to weigh in a little bit on that, Dr.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the criteria that they used, but she did come from within. She
Right.
was already a dean, she was a professor, and very often the boards might have an idea of who they already want. And if they choose an internal candidate because they were trying to make some changes, they obviously wanted to make history to appoint a Black person. Maybe, that played into the decision, the final decision. But generally speaking, when the search committees put out the criteria of who they're looking for, there were very specifics. So she had to have, there's always a checklist, did she meet X criteria in addition to, being a person of color? So I would think that those accusations are probably false, that, she was only hired because of who she was or what she represented. We get a lot of that. And um, and we all know, those of us who've been in these positions or who've competed for these positions that are higher up, that yes, the college may have on paper that they want diversity, but they don't often implement much. I know as a faculty member, I wanted diversity on my campus. And I, as a president, inserted myself in the hiring process, and I was very criticized for that. You're a president. You don't have time to interview faculty. And I said to them, well, I'm the chief hiring officer at this college, and I want to make sure that we have the kinds of faculty that would be able to implement the vision that I have for this college. And so finally, at Mass Bay, I was able to do that, and people were stunned in 2 or 3 years, the quality and the diversity that we were able to bring in, and they complimented me on that. And then when I got to Bronx Community College, I was told, no, you're the president. You go out and raise money. Let us make these decisions. But of course,
Right.
these decisions are made, not very objectively many times. So what I presented to them is that we would try this for a year. You've got to be able to negotiate when these issues come up. And if it doesn't work, if for some reason, you're really unhappy, we'll discuss it again. And that's how I was able to implement that at Bronx Community College, because I was told coming in, don't come and do what you did in Massachusetts here. Basically, I was warned. So
Right.
pinga, I got the pinga, right?
Right.
Pinga, pesote felon boys.
Wow.
So there had to be ways that I had to, try to do this. And of course, I discovered as I interviewed with the provost, I followed all the procedures. Search committees at the faculty level, at the departmental level, did their interviews. I didn't interfere. And then they came up with 3 names. Once they had 3 finalists, then it's the provost with the department chairs that tends to make those decisions. And so because I inserted myself in the process, I interviewed with the provost. The provost is the vice president of academic affairs on a lot of campuses. And, I got flack for it, but I, maintained that position and was able to bring in a lot of diverse faculty, and in fact was complimented, at the central level for having, such a high level of diversity on my campus because of the
Right.
way it was implemented. So if you give me 3 names, one happens to be Black, one happens to be Latino, and one happens to be white, obviously, if we have a choice, this is not, affirmative action or taking the wrong person or the least qualified person. You told me
Right.
any one of those three are fine. So
Mm-hmm.
if the Black person gets appointed and gets offered the job and accepts it, then you should not have, anything to criticize or be unhappy
Mm-hmm.
about. But on many campuses, that is not done. Many presidents will not insert themselves in the process. Then, though I was complimented, by my bosses and the chancellor, they would tell me in private, oh, every president should do that. But they did not mandate for every president to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So, you get the results of whatever your vision and your passion is. If you just
Right.
you find a way to work with people and help them to understand what the goal is and what the vision
Mhm.
is.
Yeah, I think one thing to point out from the conversations we've had with people about the DEI hire conversation is that one, the folks who are saying, this DEI hire term, they're assuming that automatically it's a bad thing because of the way that they're defining diversity, equity, and inclusion as just
Mhm.
another form of affirmative action. And even affirmative action itself is supposed, to not be okay. Whereas both of these, right, are efforts to try to um, create what we call these systemic inequalities that people who are on the margins of society have had to deal with for hundreds of years, right? And so
Exactly.
what we heard was, who are these donors and these wealthy donors, alumni folks to define for people of color what they should have as movements to begin with. Like, why assume that this is wrong in the first place? Even if she were to have been a DEI hire, which
Mhm.
she wasn't, because this is someone who had been a scholar, went to Stanford and was at Harvard and was the dean before she became the president. So for those who are asking, in the chat, like, why did
Mhm.
this come up, we have to go back to um the politicization, of campuses that we see. Because the other thing we've seen over the past several years is that folks on the right blame liberalism and progressive values for the way that the country is right now, right? And they're saying, had it not been for all of these progressives on college campuses, we would have a different society. So they equate DEI, progressive values, with, um, taking the country in a direction that they don't want it to go in. So
Right.
that's where, to be super clear, we get the friction and why so many people jumped on the bandwagon to say, DEI is the reason she's here. We need to
Right.
get rid of her and she has to resign.
Right.
Uh, yeah.
And
So, hmm?
the issue of she has to resign also is not just these public people who made statements and attacked her in different ways. It's
Hmm.
also the pressure that the board themselves are under, because board members themselves, that corporation at Harvard, I'm sure they got a lot of threats, not just from the people who were donors.
Hmm.
So it's a very hard period for everybody,
Right.
on the campus, but especially, of course, for the person who's being attacked.
Yes.
And it's an uncomfortable position to be in. You don't want to be in it, to belabor it, to
Hmm.
stay forever, because I've heard people criticize and say, oh, she shouldn't have resigned. Well, little do you know what the pressure is that she was under.
Right.
And
Other safety concerns.
safety, absolutely, because there were
Yeah.
real threats made, to her
Mhm.
person, to her life. And
Yeah.
if you were in those shoes, you would say, better give up this job and, come out, because,
Hmm.
you're hurt as it is because people are maligning you. But then on top of it, your own person is at risk.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's a
Yeah.
very difficult position to be in.
No, we can't dismiss that at all.
Yeah.
The mental health toll that
Yeah.
it takes and the stress. And even for roles that aren't necessarily this highly visible, right?
Hmm.
Even in regular managerial roles that happen inside of companies or hospitals, corporations, what have you, there is some level of animus that
Yes.
people of our background or color experience in a day-to-day. And so I want to maybe talk a little bit about that before we open up for questions. Carole, for regular folks, let's just say, right, regular people who are just experiencing the racism, the xenophobia, all of the questioning of their talents in their regular daily job, whatever, in whatever field that,
It
may be,
is.
right? How would you say, what guidance, has worked for you? Would you like to share to make sure that, these folks, us, we survive, not only survive, but thrive, if not in those particular roles, then in other places that are more welcoming.
Yeah, I think regardless of the role you're in, regardless of the culture you're in, you're going to have to face racism in this country. There's
Mhm,
just, no two ways about it, that most of us sooner or later have incidents where that occurs. Not even in a managerial role, just a plain faculty member. I know of faculty members who've been harassed by other faculty members and who haven't been supported to even make it through a faculty appointment. And
mhm,
so there are bullies on campuses everywhere. There are bullies at, different workplaces. So
mhm,
I think that once you feel that kind of threat and you're experiencing that, you must report it to someone. You must share
mhm,
with other people.
mhm,
Don't keep that to yourself, or don't think that you're the one, who's bad, because there are bad, incompetent people all over at every level in every field. We've
mhm,
been through ourselves, some bad instructors at campuses, and yet they survive, they get tenure, and they're there forever.
mhm,
So so when we are experiencing those things, we have to voice it. There are right now affirmative action, regulations and diversity regulations where you
mhm.
should be able to report these kinds of things
Right.
safely to an HR office. And
Mhm,
if your HR office is in cahoots with whoever on the
mhm,
campus or the company, wherever you're working, then you need to go outside of the entity. And
mhm,
again, by talking to people, by finding out what your rights are, finding out, what you can do, where you can report it, because
mhm,
keeping it quiet is not helping anyone. It's not, helping you and your mental, state of health, and it's not helping your community or anybody else. So
mhm,
it's important that, we talk about these things. It's also important when you're in positions, I think, um, even if you're just aspiring to something and you're just at the entry level, to make
mhm,
sure that you work on your own self-development, that you also look for mentors, identify, people in your community, in your profession, who can serve as mentors. And most people are willing to be mentors if asked.
mhm,
I know I always took it upon myself as a leader to serve as a mentor, and I'm very proud that there are two college presidents who became presidents in the Haitian community who were my mentees. Very
mhm,
proud, that I worked with them. I've had
mhm,
many others who were non-Haitians who became college presidents as well. So I think that when we get to these positions, it's important that we think about our role and our availability as well.
mhm.
And then there are always, places that you can go for development. So,
Right.
as a professional in any field, I would
Mhm,
encourage you, if you want to, climb the ladder in your own field, your own area of expertise,
mhm,
to seek professional development and seek friendships and collaboration and camaraderie with other professionals. I think when
mhm,
you build your own network, you are that much stronger
mhm.
when you face these kinds of challenges and difficulties.
Mm-hmm. There, one more, if I might add, because you talked about it in your opinion piece for the Haitian Times, which was published yesterday. If anyone missed it, I'll put the link in the chat for you. But you mentioned a very specific piece of action that I thought was very powerful, and that is to form your own personal advisory board or board of advisors, right? Can you talk a little bit more about that and how that might be different or complementary to the mentors or sponsors that someone might have around them to support them.
Yeah, I think definitely that is something that's very important, especially when you get into these executive suite level positions,
Mm-hmm.
that you don't want people around you who are just going to be yes people. Oh,
Mm,
Carole, you're great. Oh, you're doing wonderful. That is not what your advisory board needs to be. It needs to be people that you can trust and who can tell you the truth. So
mm,
that if you share with them certain incidents and certain things that occurred, that they can give you real truthful advice,
mm-hmm.
whether individually or as a group. When things happen to me, there are certain key people that I would reach out to and help me brainstorm, what should I do? How should I react? What should I put in writing? So it's very important that you have those kind of friendships and you
Mm-hmm.
develop them through the years, whether professionally or as friends, but not yes people, not
Mm,
people who are just going to be praising you. You don't need a choir, telling you you're great. You
right.
need people who can honestly say, what you did there was not so good and
Mm-hmm.
help you to reflect on it so that you can reassess what you're doing because none of us is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
All of us, try our best. And then when we are put on these under pressure in some of these positions or
Mm-hmm.
where you have to be quick thinking to make decisions, very often, I'll pick up the phone and call, one of my trusted colleagues
Mm-hmm.
and kind of just brainstorm together. In the evening, I had to, because of, to keep my own sanity, I had to kind of start putting a limit to my time
Mm-hmm.
and how I responded, to emails. And you get bombarded with all kinds of things. There are people who
Right.
just want to constantly, see you or talk to you and want access to you. And you have to, organize your time so that you have me time. Taking care of yourself is very important because
Mm,
you can't be any good to others if you're not taking care of yourself.
right.
So I think that part is very important as well.
Mm-hmm. I think these are wonderful, pieces of advice for folks on this call tonight to take away with them. If you don't already have mentors or personal board of advisors, go out and start working on forming one because that is part of the support system that you need, to carry you through those tough times. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring in some of the questions that I see folks put in the chat, just being mindful of time here. So let me just go ahead and start reading them. There are a few from folks we know, like Dr. Nicola, who's making the point about making sure that we keep in mind the impact on mental health that these traumatic experiences can have on us all. And so, her question is, what steps did you use to help you cope? And what advice would you have for those who are serving in leadership positions in the academy at this moment?
Yeah, I mean the thing is, always check yourself and be critical of your own self to be able to evaluate the things you're doing. Be a listener. Have people you can talk to. Definitely, talk to other people who are, um, in the field of mental health. If you need to go out and speak to someone professionally, then you should do that.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these things, read, meditate, pray, whatever it is will work for you to help build your spirituality and your peace. Because
Mm-hmm.
once you have peace of mind as you embark on these things, and you know that the criticisms that are coming are not, true, for example, then
Mm-hmm.
you just don't internalize them.
Right.
If there are criticisms that are true and there are things that you need to work on, then obviously you're going to face yourself and also work on those things. But definitely when these challenges come up, you've got to be also a quick thinker and remember to take time out for yourself. I can't emphasize that enough. You know,
Mm-hmm.
people who are in positions. I mean, Dr. Gerda Nicolai, in fact, I am on her board at ACT, and we're
Right.
always after her to make sure she takes time out for herself because we know
Mm-hmm.
she's constantly going. And even though she may not be in, you know, in settings that are aggressive or pernicious, you know, or
Mm-hmm.
destructive, still you need downtime. You need to be able to have time for yourself. I notice Dr. Eve Salomo Fernandez is here, and
Mm-hmm.
Eve actually was one of my brilliant vice presidents when I was at Mass Bay Community College.
Mm-hmm.
And she's a trailblazer herself, having already now been president at two places and is in her third presidency.
Wow.
So Eve is really doing well. I'm very proud of her as one of my initial mentees.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
She's got what it takes and knows how to you know, work on campuses with people. So
That's
that's another example of another person that we have here
mm-hmm.
who could be of help and to others of you. There is one thing though that we did want to do, right, McElvey? We talked about getting a group of presidents together, and I did reach out to some of my colleagues who are
Mm-hmm.
presidents to see if we might be able to come together to do something as a group,
Mm-hmm.
whether, you
No,
know,
that sounds like a wonderful idea. The pages or of the Haitian Times are always open to the community to send in their opinions or ideas and to try to get support for anything that will move the community forward. So I hope that, the presidents do respond and that we can support a show of support, if you will, for
yeah,
Dr. Gay. And not just
yeah,
for Dr. Gay, but I think it's important for people who are watching us as a community to know that we're not, silent. I
exactly.
saw a lot of responses from, the faculty at Harvard, for example, that letter, the alumni letter everyone signed, different Black academic sent, words of support to her. I didn't see just us, like her other community,
Our
right?
colleagues, yes,
Right.
yes,
I've seen maybe one or two notes of encouragement here, words of encouragement from, I believe, the Haitian Ladies Network that were posted online to show support. But to your point again, it just hasn't been as cohesive and swift as it should be.
right.
So I do hope that could be a big takeaway from this experience for our community and that someone can start working on some of the ideas that you've put forth.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, the other thing also is on us as members of this community. I
mhm,
think that those of us who are connected to the community, people know of us. You know, when I was going through a lot of the noise, if you will, at Mass Bay,
mhm,
there were people, you know, in the community that stood up and came out. They didn't, you know, protest. There was no big group that
right.
letters, but there were individuals, you know, who were there and who were vigilant.
Mhm,
You know, the Boston Reporter, for example,
mhm,
all of these kinds of entities, it's important for them to come
mhm.
out and, you know, to talk and take a
Yeah.
position.
Okay. I see, a very poignant question here, about words of wisdom that you might offer Dr. Gay if you were to, have a conversation with her, right? I'll let you think about that for a little bit and then come back around because I'd like to end on that. Those words of wisdom. So I'll give you some time to just ponder and share with us. In the meantime, let's go to some of these other questions folks have about navigating toxic workplaces, right? One here is, what roles do allies play or can play in helping folks to survive or beat back certain attacks in the workplace that we were talking about earlier?
That was what role can the
Allies play, people who
allies
aren't
play?
necessarily of your community or who are not you, but who may be adjacent and understand what you're going through, who would be open to supporting you.
Yeah, I mean, I think allies are very important. And as someone said in the chat, it's important, to have that community of allies before
Mm-hmm.
you get into these positions.
Right.
Because many times when you're not connected and you don't have the allies, and
Mm-hmm.
someone mentioned here in the chat that a lot of people in our community only heard of Claudine after she was named president
Right.
or after the issues or the scandals,
Those.
became
Mm-hmm.
public. So I think it's important that we be grounded in our communities as well,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because though the community itself may not be able to save you or save your job, but
Mm-hmm.
they can take positions and they can be a voice. And
Mm-hmm.
it is very important to have that when you're going through these difficult times. The other politician of Haitian descent that I wanted to highlight was Linda Forey when I
Mm-hmm.
was in Massachusetts, because
Mm-hmm.
both Marie Saint-Fleur and Linda Forey were staunch supporters
Mm-hmm.
and, helped to keep the conversations going. So if I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have relationships with these people before, it would have been difficult, for them to come out and support. And so I think that makes a big difference. Um,
Mm-hmm.
again, you know, and again, I mean, sometimes when people come from within, I've seen this happen with another president, actually, who was a white woman in Massachusetts, who
Mm-hmm.
came from within, who was faculty, who was provost, et cetera, and was named president. And then she had a big backlash.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, I wonder, when they do these searches, they usually try not to take people from within
Mm-hmm.
consciously because of that, because so many people already know you. And whoever might have hated you before now comes out of the woodwork, and you're not even
Right.
prepared to deal with that level of animus.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's actually, let me ask a follow-up there because I think a few people have been curious about the fact that it was mostly lawyers for the board, the fellows
uh-huh,
of Harvard, who prepared Dr. Gay for the congressional hearings, right?
yeah.
And from what I read, that attorney excluded the communications team, right? Which
Mm,
you mentioned when you had your noise that you were dealing with, they actually went out and got you a communications team to help you put out the great things you were doing to kind of
mhm.
counterbalance the negativity that was being reported, right?
Yes.
So then do you think that's an indication that the level of support Dr. Gay received just was not adequate or appropriate given the time and the space that we're in as a society right now?
Yeah, I think definitely
Mhm.
um, the level of support that she did get was not sufficient. Yes, from a legal point of view, I mean, I listened to the hearings. She answered all the questions, pretty well, except that one where she said it depended on the context kind of
Context.
thing,
Mhm.
where they tried to nail her. But I think definitely had the communications team been involved, that might have made a difference too.
Mm.
Because, the nuances of some of these responses weren't there. They were,
Right.
black and white. Yes, this is what we did. And many times she repeated the same things over and over again. And you
Mhm.
think that would have squelched the people who were asking these questions, but that
Right.
didn't work. So yeah, I mean, I really felt sorry for all three presidents
Mhm.
because I think they were really unfairly targeted. And
Right.
though it just so happens that all three of them, were women, and I think it says something about our country in terms of where things are going.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Yeah.
many colleges right now are being led by women presidents,
Mhm.
and more women are having access to the presidency, but of course, not more and more women of color.
Right.
So, so there's always, that dichotomy that when women make progress, it's not necessarily for all of us.
Right.
And so those of us who really are interested in these kinds of positions, really need to find our networks and our niche and develop those kinds of
Yeah.
relationships and networks. We all know networking is extremely important
Mm-hmm.
in any field. So, connecting professionally, connecting in your community, all these
Mm-hmm.
things can only help. And then again, you have to find the balance because there are people who stay away from their communities because then they feel that, they're being
Right.
constantly called on. So you do have to find that self-balance.
Mm-hmm. Here's one more thing I'll throw at you, right? Because we
Mm,
were speaking earlier about some folks inside academia right now who are Haitian, who are feeling like they're feeling very vulnerable, you know,
hmm
in many ways, some are feeling not muzzled necessarily, but that they do have to stay quiet. So, and quiet not because of not because they're not speaking out against attacks that they may be subjected to, but just in opining even on what's going on with Dr. Gay, because they don't want to then attract backlash because of the world we live in, where not only can you, be demoted, lose your job, but you can actually be, swatted or doxxed or any of these terrible things that we're seeing people in leadership roles face, right?
hmm
So this might be a whole other panel, but I do wonder, and you had brought up, like, what role does higher education play in our democratic society when the professors, faculty, students themselves feel like they can't be as vocal in expressing themselves as they had been in the past or should be?
Yeah, I think it would be really sad if, you couldn't have discussions on campus as openly as we should. People go to universities wanting to get there to be able to explore a lot of topics, to be able to learn a lot of topics,
Right.
and to be able to appreciate different points of view. And
Mm-hmm.
if at this point now people are not going to be able to express themselves, for some of these Congress people to say that there's just too much DEI on campuses, too much
Right.
diversity, too much liberalism, and that's why we have these issues. No, we
Mm-hmm.
need to provide the safe spaces where people can have these discussions, and we need to agree to disagree. That's a phrase that I grew up with in academia, that if you didn't
Agreed.
agree with your colleague or you didn't agree with your professor, you can still agree to disagree, make your points, and hopefully learn something out of it. So it's not just about brainwashing, right? We're in
Mm-hmm.
college to learn and to be able to develop our own ideas and to come up
Right.
with our own solutions. And
Mm-hmm.
so, if we're saying now that campuses um, can't have that, then are we really fostering democracy? Are we respecting the Constitution, because the
Mm-hmm.
Constitution does provide for free speech?
Mm-hmm.
The free speech, though, has to be balanced so that it doesn't become threats to people, so that people don't
Right.
feel unsafe. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
in conversations with my daughter, who's done a lot of work on hate,
Mm-hmm.
we've talked about that. Is it okay for a group of KKK people to walk on campus and say, all blacks should be killed? I mean, a president who hears that kind of thing would have to put a stop to it, immediately. And I
Right.
guess it's the kind of thing that we're hearing now in terms of the, dichotomy between freedom of speech and
Mm-hmm.
when it borders on lack of safety,
Right. Right.
borders on
Um,
incidents, that you really have to be ready. And I think all the presidents did talk about alerting their security people, making sure they took
yeah.
measures if
Yeah.
things got out of hand.
Yeah.
But, those answers were not good enough for that committee.
Right.
Um, so, I
I
mean,
think.
when you think in CUNY back in the 60s and 70s around
Mm-hmm.
the Vietnam War, where students took over campuses and
Mm-hmm.
did all kinds of things like that. I mean, that you could say definitely was a time when a lot of people were unsafe.
Right.
and officers were threatened or whatever. Yes, some students were jailed, some students, had
Mhm.
these experiences, but at no time did we say that all of a sudden we should have no discussions on campus or that all these students should be thrown out. Because
Right.
some of the politicians were insinuating is those students who were calling for the genocide of Israel should be thrown out. On what basis are you throwing them out?
Mhm.
Yes, they were, maybe you think they were inciting um, violence, but there are other ways that you could have, squelched that or called them in, provided
Mhm.
opportunities, for discussion. If we really want to have democracy, people have to be able to talk to each other. They have to be able to address problems,
Mhm.
publicly.
Mhm.
And so, I wonder what kind of democracy are we living in, and are we going to leave for for our younger generation?
Yeah, no, it's a very
Um,
good question. If
it's
campuses aren't protected in
yeah.
this way, and anyone can be disparaged until they're out of their roles, right?
Mm-hmm.
What
Mm-hmm.
are you telling the rest of us or the next generation of people coming up?
Yeah.
So we're at time, and there are a few more questions in the chat I'd like to get to really quickly. Let's see here. You see a comment from an anonymous here. Bear with me here.
Okay.
A few people are suggesting a couple resources or next steps we can take, right? A
Mm,
National Association of Haitian Americans in Higher Education and things like that. I mean, you're
mm-hmm.
involved with the Haitian Studies Association,
Yeah.
Carole, right?
Yep.
Is this
Mm-hmm.
something that you might perhaps bring up to them, either the idea of, I mean, I don't know how this would be different. This is a very spontaneous suggestion, I
Mm.
feel like here, but I'll let you weigh in
Well,
on
I'm
that.
sure there are members of the Haitian Studies Association on this call. And I
Mm-hmm,
think that my colleagues definitely do provide support and mentoring. In
mm-hmm,
fact, through the association, we've had several young scholars, who started out as students attending our conferences, who
mm-hmm,
have completed their doctorates and who've become professors and are now our colleagues,
mm-hmm,
who attend these conferences, who mentor others. So I think that association definitely has set that example in
mm-hmm.
terms of being able to support young scholars in higher education. And we probably need to look at professionals in higher education, because now there are many more of us.
Right.
And so maybe that's something that we might want to look at together. I know there's a Haitian Teachers Association.
Mm-hmm,
Um, there are some in Massachusetts, there are in Florida, there's in New York,
mm-hmm.
perhaps a collective of them. There's the Haitian Professionals
Right.
organization also. So maybe at some juncture, some of these organizations might find ways to collaborate
Mm-hmm.
and sponsor events and opportunities for people to network and mingle, across fields and across
Yeah.
specialties.
Yeah, I think that actually answers another question we had here about linking um, professors or faculty in the public sector with people at private colleges, private public education sector with people at private universities, and certainly the Ivy League
Yeah.
schools. So I think you covered that.
Yeah, and I think people do in their own professional fields, because there
Uh-huh.
are conferences in all of the fields, but I don't think we do it across our community per se, the
Right,
Haitian
right.
community.
Yeah. Well, I mean, having been to the Haitian Studies Association conference last year and having worked with the Haitian Studies Institute at Brooklyn College as part of our work in the Haitian Times, I know it's a very vibrant group of people who are very passionate about their fields, what they do, their scholarship, how they want to contribute. And I hope that if anything, this entire saga with Dr. Gay will highlight how incredibly, numerous and dynamic Haitians are in higher education. Because I don't remember having that many Haitian American professors when I was in college. I had
Mm-hmm.
school and through
Yeah.
elementary and high school, but I can't recall off the top of my head one who was a college professor. So to
Yeah.
see so many of you all now at these organizations is really heartening. And I hope that we'll continue to maintain the conversations and discussions we're having to bring out a lot of the work that you all do here in our community and for all these communities benefiting from your scholarship.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to add
Absolutely.
that really quickly.
Yeah. I
All
think
right.
definitely we need that.
Okay, so again, we're going to wrap up in a few minutes. So I'm coming back to you, Carole, to just share your thoughts on what, some words of encouragement
Mm,
might be for Dr. Gay during this moment. And not only for her, but for um, the students who are on break currently, who are set to come back very soon from their winter breaks.
right. I think, in closing, what I would want to say is,
Mhm.
for Dr. Gay, definitely I send her, my sympathy and knowing what she's going through because I've been through some of it in different ways. Obviously,
Mhm.
I didn't come in and confront this on my first 6 months.
Right.
So it was different. But though the times were different, when I think back, it's 20 years. When I came to Bronx Community College, it was like, 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So these questions of people wanting to stir the pot and just
Yeah.
wanting to be against you just for the sake of being against you,
Right.
you have to be strong-minded enough to know that it's not about you and
Mm,
to know that, yes, you might have made a mistake. Everybody makes mistakes. I've made mistakes along the way, but
mhm,
in some places, in some institutions, some people are more easily forgiven than others.
right.
So if, you're at a point in your institution where you're not forgiven, that you
Mm,
learn to forgive yourself because you did everything that you possibly could do at the moment. In
mhm,
hindsight, all of us can say, we could have done this, we could have done that. We've all had,
mhm,
experiences like that. But when you're in the heat of the moment, it's very difficult, um, you know, and sometimes it's best. Agree that it probably was best for her to step down when she stepped down. Because had
mhm,
it continued and festered, it would affect her psyche even more.
yeah.
And who needs that, especially when, she's being allowed to stay at the campus and continue to teach. So if
Mhm,
you're going to teach there, that in itself is also very difficult
right,
because you're
right.
going to have some students who are for you, who want you, who will be there. And there are other students who will, just despise you no matter what because of their own judgment, And
Right.
so it's a very difficult position to be in. So
Mhm,
I, I hope and I think I'm pretty confident that she is taking care of herself. And
mhm,
that's why, she decided to step down when she stepped down because there are battles that you can't win. And
right.
when you get to a point where things become so public,
Uh-huh.
then it's to your advantage and to your own, well-being that you don't prolong it as well.
Yeah. I agree a
Um,
1000%. And I
yeah.
said so as much in my opinion piece that is also available on the Haitian Times for everyone to read.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree, 100% support Dr. Gay's decision to have stepped down. To be
Yes.
very clear, people were under the misconception that she had left Harvard or maybe even was about to be fired, but
Hmm.
that's not the case. She
Right.
saw the what was clearly in front of her, her ability to continue to do fundraising, which, as you said, is a major role as a major responsibility for a president. That was compromised with the donors,
Hmm.
threatening and actually pulling their pledges and funds. And
Mm-hmm.
with that much noise and distractions and the safety concerns, it made no sense to stay in that role to prove a point. So I
Absolutely.
applaud
Yes.
her for stepping
The one
down
good thing is,
now.
as a faculty member, I mean, the salary was reported as $250,000, and that's great. But
Mhm,
she also has a settlement that her lawyers have worked on. And
mhm.
so financially, I think she'll be in good shape. And
Yes.
so once, she's able to move past this trauma,
Hmm.
she'll be really in a good place, and we can look forward to hearing, good things from her as well.
Yes. I hope
So
she'll engage more with us as a
I hope
community
so
for sure.
too. I hope,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
Because I
mean,
mean, her area of expertise is one area where, when she was named, that rectors and presidents of universities in Haiti had said to me, "Oh, we should get together with her, we should connect, etc." I said, "Well, she just got the job. I didn't know her
right.
personally, but give her a chance to be settled in her job, and then we could talk about connecting with Haiti and
Hmm.
helping us, especially with her area of expertise."
Right. And
So
democracy and political participation is her expertise.
exactly. So
So
definitely we hope that we will, hear from her in the future.
sounds great.
So
Well,
thank you.
no, thank you, Carol. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. We've had just so many wonderful gems that you've shared with us, right? I mean, for me, the the one that stands out is the need for this community to set up some mechanism to respond swiftly, collectively, anytime that one of ours is under attack,
Hmm.
whether or not that person had engaged with us or came from the community, like some of us are, it doesn't matter, right? So I think
Hmm.
that is something worth following up on as our community continues to grow. I mean, there's 1.5 million of us in this country, and many more are coming with the humanitarian parole program, TPS, all of it, right? We're having kids and they're having kids. So the number of Haitians and Haitian Americans in this country will only continue to grow. So I
Yep.
think it's definitely much needed to have that body be established who could come forward. Um,
Hmm.
the other pieces you shared with us is the personal advisory board and making sure that people have or advocate for the resources that they need on the job to succeed in their different roles. Professional development, you said, is definitely should be a priority. Building your network, before you actually need them is part of the job you have to do. It's not just keeping your head down and doing the work. And
Yeah.
so I hope people take that to heart and really research more what that means to establish a board of sorts to help guide you in your journey. Because I think I've seen it make a big difference in many people's lives from the communications work that I've done. So
Mm.
as far as just dealing with toxicity in the workplace, right? Self-care, you mentioned,
Hmm.
so important to make sure that we take care of ourselves during these difficult, challenging times. And for professors and people in academia, I heard you say things like making sure that, you're listening, that you're getting professional support, such as a therapist, is kind of what I interpreted if you need it in this current moment with
Yeah.
all of the noise swirling. So these are the things I asterisked. I know some people might have pulled out different things on their own that especially resonated. But as always with the Haitian Times, we thank you for joining. We'll share some resources with you if you are on the call. I see folks asking if the recording will be shared. Yes, it will be. So
Hmm.
continue to follow us on socials, on Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn to get those links when they become available. And we'll certainly email you if you've put in your email to get into this Zoom.
Right.
One last thing, Carol, is people are asking if you could share your contact email. So I'll let you address that offline if you'd like, if you're not comfortable now, but I just didn't want to leave that unsaid. So
Yeah, I mean, I think if people are interested in connecting or whatever, if they've asked you for that, definitely then you can give it to them.
sure. And we're all on LinkedIn, everyone. You can.
Yeah, I am on LinkedIn, and I respond also to LinkedIn
Yeah.
directly to people if I need to follow up with you. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks again so much, everyone, for joining us on a rainy Tuesday night in New York. Whether you were in New York City, Florida, Montreal, Fort Myers, San Francisco Bay Area. I loved all these locations that people came from. We really thank you for joining us, and we'll continue to have these as they're needed through this platform. So stay tuned, follow us, and go to HaitianTimes.com or all our socials. A huge thank
Fabulous.
you, Carole, for reaching out. You know,
My
your
pleasure.
leadership is really exemplary, and I just want to congratulate you and thank you for staying engaged in the community, even though you've done all you can and you're retired. I'm just amazed at what you do. So,
Thank you.
thanks again, everyone. Merci en tout le monde.
Okay, bonsoir
Good
tout le
night.
monde. Mhm. Bye.